Hello, and welcome to the Remind podcast, the podcast where we get inside the real estate entrepreneur's mind. My name is Harrison Smith, and I'm joined today by Ashley Harwood. How you doing, Ashley?
I'm great. How are you?
Good. Thanks for joining.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right. So for those people that don't know who you are, can you give us a quick little intro on who you are and what you're up to?
Yes. So I am in the greater Boston area, and I've been a licensed agent since 2013. Started my career with KW, and I'm still with KW now. I do two things. I work as a productivity coach in my market center, and I run my own coaching and training company called Move Over Extroverts. And that we specialize in working with introverted real estate agents.
Fascinating. So how did you get into real estate to start? What was your pathway into the business?
Ever since I was a kid, I was fascinated by real estate. I know that sounds weird because HGTV did not exist back then, but I would read the newspaper and look at the listings. And there was also a channel that played house listings, just kind of one at a time. I was fascinated by this house is this size and it's selling for this amount, but this one's smaller, but it's selling for more, So it's always been kind of on my mind. And then I was working in luxury retail management, and I sort of hit a point where it wasn't challenging anymore. It wasn't fun anymore. And I decided, okay, now it's the right time to take the leap and get into real estate.
Interesting. So being in retail, a lot of customer service, did you find that those skills translate well into the real estate space where you're still dealing with customers?
Absolutely. Yes. And what makes real estate more fun and interesting for me than retail is that everything is different. Every transaction is different versus retail where it's kind of the same problems over and over again.
Gotcha. So how long were you a practicing agent?
6 years full-time as a solo agent.
Okay. So you went from retail into real estate and then moved into this coaching and training area.
Correct.
So can you talk a little bit more about what the coaching and training that you provide is?
Yes. So it has a couple different forms. The bulk of it is teaching classes and doing one-on-one coaching with agents.
Okay. And you mentioned it was Move Over Extroverts.
Yes, that is the name of my company. And my programs are all called Quiet Success, the Quiet Success Program, Quiet Success Workshop, whatever.
Gotcha. So many of us are familiar with the introvert versus extrovert personalities because we deal with a lot of people. But for those that aren't, what is an introvert and then what is an extrovert, and what are the potential hurdles being one of those two?
Sure. So it's a good question. There's a lot of misunderstanding around it. Introverts are people who get their energy recharged when they're alone versus extroverts who get that energy replenished when they're with other people. And some of the challenges with either one, the goal is to know yourself well enough to be able to take what you need, whether that's scheduling alone time or scheduling time with other people, and being able to recognize when you need to recharge, when your energy is just getting too low. So that's the challenge for both. And the difference is how you go about doing that recharging. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So extroverts like to be around people. Introverts really enjoy the alone time or the quiet time to be with themselves and their own thoughts.
Yeah. And introverts like being around people too. It just takes energy. It's just draining.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
So for those of us in real estate, we must all be extroverts, right?
You would think it's about 50-50. And
Okay,
this is where my passion really lies, is in reaching the introverts in the business and reaching the people who are introverts in the business, but they don't realize it and they're tired all the time and they don't know why.
Oh, that's interesting. We hear a lot about burnout in this business, and a lot of people don't make it more than 3 to 5 years in real estate. Is part of that the mismatch of the energy they gain or lose being around people?
That's a part of it. Yes. For a lot of people, they don't understand how their own energy works. And so they're not able to recharge the way they need to. And so they're in this persistent state of burnout for far too long. and then they get out of the industry entirely.
That's fascinating. So, we hear the turnover metrics and a lot of us think it's that people don't make it, but really it just wasn't a good fit. So if somebody comes to you in that state where they love the business, but they're really struggling, what are some of the mechanisms that you can provide or coaching lessons you can teach them to deal with that, and really thrive in this business as an introvert?
So I ask a lot of questions of them, and we together come up with a new plan, both for their lead gen strategy, because that's the piece that you tends to burn people out the most.
Hmm.
So their lead gen strategy, we revamp that, we tweak it and make it something that they're going to enjoy and something that isn't quite as energy sucking. And then we look at their calendar and make sure that there's enough downtime and rest time, which also means that in order to free up that time, the lead gen piece needs to be a lot tighter and more impactful.
Okay. So is it a combination of kind of discipline around the activities and then how you manage your schedule?
It's those two plus choosing the right activities that are aligned with the person's interests and personality.
Gotcha. So somebody who's an introvert may not like making lots and lots of outbound calls, but they may enjoy some other form of meeting people and finding clients.
Correct.
All right. So what drew you most into that business? It's a very interesting component of real estate, but also really, human behavior and people. What drew you to that?
My own experience. My own experience as a struggling agent, I was able to build a pretty successful business, but it took a lot longer than it needed to. And there was just so many hurdles that I had to figure out on my own. So what made me really want to create this business and start helping people with this kind of specific niche was my goal of helping people get there faster and with a lot less stress. It's the same thing we tell our buyers and sellers. My goal is to help you accomplish your goals in your time frame with the least amount of stress. It's kind of the same thing. But back in the day, there was no one was talking about that at all. And I didn't have any role models or any resources. It was just like, okay, if you want to do well in business, you have to pick up the phone. And if you aren't going to, then you're not going to survive it. And that's one strategy, and it's great and it works. And there are 100 other strategies that also work.
Yeah. And we talk about that a lot too in the business, where you've got to find that right fit for what you're good at, what feels comfortable, even simpler than the introvert versus extrovert piece, but just finding out what are those activities that you'll actually do. So there's times that phone feels like it weighs 800 pounds and you don't want to pick it up. That's probably a good indicator you don't like making calls, but there's other things you can do. And it's just finding that match universally for people to help them thrive.
Absolutely. And that's the key, right? And I feel like if anyone's been in this business for a couple years, they might have some not bad habits, but they might have a lot of guilt around letting go of the activities they feel like they should be doing. I know that's how I felt when I decided to change up my activities and choose things that were actually working because they enjoyed them. So therefore I would do them more. So therefore I would see the results. But I had to free up my time and stop, cancel my expired subscription and stop making calls. And it felt really weird at first. I had a lot of guilt around it that I had to let go of. So that's one of my main messages to all agents, not just my introverts. But if you're going to choose a different strategy, like you got to get over that guilt piece. And we are giving you permission right now to go find something else that you're actually going to do. And then you'll see results because you're doing it consistently,
Right. Exactly. It doesn't matter what you do as long as it's something that you're consistently doing, that isn't going to lead to burnout and an eventual dislike of the business, because that's what drives people out.
Right.
So how far into your real estate career before you realized that maybe you had to change things up because you were feeling that energy drain?
It was about 2 years.
Okay. So at that point, were you kind of like sampling, trying different things, or did you really understand what the gap was and how to fix it for yourself?
I had been trial and erroring all kinds of strategies at once.
Hmm.
And that was part of why I was burning out, because I was just simply doing too many things at once. I would wake up in the morning and go to a networking breakfast and then go in the office and make calls for 2 hours and then write a bunch of notes and then go to another networking event in the evening. And then by the end of the day, I was just completely drained and tired. And then I'd wake up and do it again. And it was overall too much. So one thing that I did that made a huge difference, and I'd recommend it, is I made a list of everything I was doing to find business, all my groups I was in, everything. And then I went through and I calculated how much time I was spending total. This was after about a year.
Yeah.
So after the first year, I did this analysis. How much time did I spend on this? And then what was my return? And how much money did I spend? Some of these groups cost money, right?
Sure.
How much money, how much time, and then what was my return? And the ones I was shocked, because the ones that were more in person, I'm better in person than on the phone. And I realized this because those were the ones that were giving me results. Not necessarily a ton of closings, but a lot of connections and leads and referral partners. And the other ones where I was just spending a ton of time and money and energy, I got nothing out of those. So it was easy to make those decisions once I did that analysis and had some clarity.
Yeah. And I love that, because that's so true in any business and really in your life. Look at those things you're doing, figure out what you're getting for a return on it. And that return could be monetary. It could just be joy and happiness. It could be, whatever it might be, but look at those things you're doing. Are they giving you something back? And if they're not, maybe it's time to evaluate, do you keep doing them, or do you put that on the list of things that you stop and replace with something else? And that's true in all aspects.
It is. And I'm glad you brought up joy and happiness too, because that's not something that's as easy to calculate. Yet I believe it's just as important, if not more so.
Gotcha. So with that idea of getting into kind of that self-care piece of it, going and finding the things that refill your bucket or bring you joy and happiness, as an introvert, it's going to be really important that you find those things. Extrovert also, but it sounds like really as an introvert, it may be more important that you go find those critical few things that do kind of bring your energy back.
Yeah, I would say it's equally important for everyone. The main difference is we in our lives are usually around people. So it makes it a little bit easier for the extroverts to recharge their batteries because they're naturally going to be around people. Now, this was the opposite during the height of the pandemic. And I love using that as an example because we really got to see for the first time ever the roles being reversed. And the introverts had it easier simply because in the natural state of your life and your day, you were at home. And maybe you were home with other people, which is a whole different thing. But if you're alone, then it comes more naturally. So that the challenge for the introverts now is simply making time for that, carving it out, and protecting it and figuring out, okay, if I live in a house full of people and I'm in real estate talking to people all day, where can I get that alone time? Because it's not just going to happen on its own. Like, you have to go make it happen.
No, and I love that you brought up the pandemic period, because as we've all been returning to the office and getting back out there, and I even find for myself, there's certain things I used to do that I look at and I go, man, why did I do that? Like, I didn't enjoy doing that. It didn't feel good. So I'm just not going to do it, because during COVID, I had the excuse where I couldn't do it. And now I'm like, well, I really enjoyed not doing it, so I'm not going to do it. Did you find that your conversations during and now, hopefully after COVID, were different? Has it changed?
It's changed a little bit. Yeah. I mean, everyone had to adjust to their own ways. I think overall it was, the positive thing that came out of that experience for everyone was having that time to kind of reevaluate what you're doing and why you're doing it and make some better choices to increase your happiness, whatever that looks like.
Excellent. All right. So let's talk a little bit more about you again. When you look at your journey, the path that you've taken now into Keller Williams for many, many years, building a successful solo agent business, now a successful coach and trainer, what do you look at as the most important aspect to your success? Do you credit a habit, a mindset, a mentor, What do you look at as has been the key to get you to where you've gotten to?
Mm, that's a good question. It's hard to say just one. If I had to pick just one, though, I think that the most valuable tool that I have is journaling. I know that sounds really kind of silly and simple, but I've used that as a tool to get me through some very challenging times and to do goal setting and processing and like future casting and everything that's in my head. Once it's on paper, it not only solidifies it for me, but it helps me to process. For years, that's been my tool. I can pick it up and use it however long I need it, you know?
Yeah, I love that you mentioned journaling. It's a topic that fascinates me. I've had a tough time getting into it. I've heard many people tell me that it would be great for me to actually just kind of get all the things in my brain down on paper. When you sit down to journal, is it just an open notebook page and you write whatever you're thinking? Do you have like prompts or questions you try to answer? How do you do it that you found has worked for you?
I just free flow it. The things that I have to have though are right there because I do it every morning. It has to be like a nice moleskin because I like how the pages feel and felt tips. Has to be felt tips
Okay.
because I like the tactile process of writing. I enjoy watching the words form on the page. That's part of the experience for me. I almost said therapy. It's kind of therapy. I don't know. It's weird, but it's a free flowing process. So whatever's in my brain, sometimes it turns into a list. Sometimes it turns into bullet points. But it's just whatever I feel that day.
Gotcha. So no restrictions, just let whatever's in your brain come out. See, I think I could do that. It's trying to stick to a format or a program I find tricky because there's days I'm like, I just don't want to write about that. Like that's not what's on my mind or the topic that's really burning right now. I love the idea of it just being free flowing. But I think to our point earlier, it's got to be something you do consistent, right?
Honestly, I don't think
Oh,
so. For me, that's one thing I do it consistently just because I like it so much. Um, but I don't think there's any harm in taking a break. I certainly don't feel guilty if I miss a couple days or if I'm on vacation and I take my brain out and put it on a shelf for a week. I have nothing to journal about because I'm not thinking about it.
gotcha.
So I think it's a fine line between using it as a tool without boxing yourself in and making it a chore.
I like that because that might be one of the struggle points many of us have. I know maybe myself included, where I feel like it has to be a chore. It's got to be, if you read the Miracle Morning and all those, you've got to do it every day. It's got to be part of what you do. And to me, I feel like I'm forcing myself to do work that I otherwise wouldn't do because there's not an option there. So it's interesting to let it just happen naturally.
Yeah, I would say for something like that, it doesn't directly correlate to any money-making activities. It's just for me to be a more, better functioning human and business owner. So for that reason, I don't think consistency is important. I think use it when you need it and just have it there. Like it's like a Band-Aid almost. Like you don't always need it, but they're there in the drawer when you do. You can pull one out and it's there for you.
Awesome. Okay. So on the other side of that, what do you think has been the most difficult lesson you've learned on this journey of yours?
Mm, I think it's been difficult to kind of put my ego on the shelf with some of this. A lot of us struggle a little bit with like getting out of production and doing other things. There are times when it can feel a little bit like, what am I doing? Did I walk away from the business? Am I, failing? And it's like, no, sometimes you have to take a step back in certain aspects to move forward in other aspects and to build something new.
Okay. Yeah. So
Like there were times in my life where I felt like I had burned everything to the ground just to rebuild it.
yeah, well, I mean, to that point though, I was literally having this conversation with somebody this morning over coffee, which is, there's points in our lives where we have to be okay to take a step back because that'll help propel ourselves farther forward. But it's really hard to be willing to take that step back when you've been used to or accustomed to a certain level of success or a certain level of income or a certain, whatever it might be, it's hard to step back. To your point, there's ego and pride there for sure. And then, the other side of it too, is there's that scarcity mindset that creeps in, which is, well, what if you never get back? Like, what if it doesn't work? What if you can't recover? And it's really interesting how much your mind spins in moments like that.
Yeah. And those moments are where the journal comes in handy, because you just put it all on the paper and then it's at least out of your body and on the page.
It's a great point and a great moment for journaling. It seems like when you write all those fears or concerns down and then read them back, they don't seem as bad as they were when you were trying to internalize and wrestle with them.
Absolutely. It goes back to the fear of the unknown, and somehow even saying it out loud is really helpful in making it less scary.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. Okay. So continuing down that path, when you look back at everything you've done, where you've been, what is the one piece of advice you wish you had known or somebody had told you when you first got started?
That's another good question. I think I wish somebody had told me to start doing one thing consistently, like start a YouTube channel, years ago. I'd spent a lot of time going around New England and teaching classes for free during the first year. And thankfully, somebody had told me to make sure that I collect email addresses and start building my list that way. So I did that. But I definitely missed the boat a little bit on building up my social media presence and building a YouTube channel and all these other things. So I'm a little behind on that.
Yeah, it's one of those things I feel like we all want to do it. We all have good intentions to do it, but it's a little bit uncomfortable. It's a little bit different. The imposter syndrome creeps in, which is, does anybody really want to hear what I've got to say? It's an interesting thing to put yourself out there like that, but it can be incredibly rewarding. All right, Ashley, before we let you go, if somebody's interested in learning more about you, real estate, Move Over Extroverts, and the coaching and training you provide, what is the best way for people to get in touch with you?
So they can find me two ways. They can find me on my website, moveoverextroverts.com. And then I also run a Facebook group that's called Introverts in Real Estate.
Yeah, I'm in the Facebook group. I find the content really interesting. I never really identified as an introvert, but the more I dove into who I am, I actually am more of an introvert than I thought. I found the content in there really fascinating. Well, it's been a pleasure having you, Ashley. Thanks so much for joining us.